Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're exploring a fascinating and, I have to say, a highly unconventional argument about where the text of the Bible actually comes from.
So how can you really trust the words in a book that's thousands of years old? Well, this explainer unpacks one author's very controversial answer. It's a story filled with meticulous preservation, professional scribes, and some pretty explosive accusations of forgery. It's a journey that's definitely going to challenge how we think about the very foundations of this ancient text.
So, first things first. The source we're looking at begins by arguing that before we even get to the words on the page, we've got to acknowledge our own biases. Our personal context, our social location, as they call it, fundamentally changes how we see things.
I mean, think about it. This happens all through history, right? The author points out that a medieval artist is going to paint biblical scenes with the castles and clothes they know. Then, centuries later, a slave owner in the 1800s reads the very same text and finds justifications for slavery. Our world just profoundly shapes the meaning we pull from the page. But here is the crucial point, the central claim of this whole argument. The real battle isn't over what the words mean, but which ancient manuscripts we should be reading in the first place. So according to this view, the problem isn't just our biased interpretation, it's the text itself.
The author's argument really centers on a direct attack against the science of textual criticism, and they claim this whole science is built on three fundamentally flawed, or as they put it, evil rules.
So these are three basic principles that modern scholars use to try and figure out what an ancient text originally said. For example, they often think a more difficult or awkward reading is probably the original, because scribes tend to smooth things out over time. But the author of our source, they reject every single one of these principles.
So against that first rule, the author argues that biblical texts were official documents of the Roman Empire. They were copied by the best professional scribes who treated the work with immense respect. In their view, these weren't some lazy copyists. They were state-sanctioned pros working under penalty of death.
And this leads right to their objection to rule number 2, choosing quality over quantity. They claim the so-called quality manuscripts that scholars love so much are in fact complete forgeries. So prioritizing them is like trying to build a house on a totally fraudulent foundation.
And the author's reaction to that third rule, well, it's pretty blunt. They just dismiss it as crazy. The whole point they're making is that these three principles aren't sound science at all, but a set of arbitrary rules that systematically lead scholars to choose the worst, most corrupted text possible.
Okay, so this brings us to the most explosive part of the argument. The author's entire case really hinges on this, the claim that the cornerstone manuscripts of modern Bibles are not just flawed, but are actually intentional frauds.
And the main targets here are two of the most famous ancient texts in the world, the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. Now, most scholars value these very highly, but from this author's perspective, they're the work of, and I'm quoting here, Satanists, filled with errors and just completely unreliable.
And to back this up, they point to this number, 23,000. That's how many corrections they claim are in the Codex Sinaiticus alone, calling it the most corrected biblical manuscript in history. They argue that's an average of 30 corrections per page. To them, this is a clear sign of a sloppy, modern creation, not some ancient revered document.
So if it's a forgery, who did it? Well, the source introduces us to the alleged forger. The claim is that a 19th century Greek monk and scholar named Constantine Simonides actually created the Sinaiticus manuscript himself when he was a young man. And here's the core of the conspiracy claim. The source alleges that Simonides said he hid his own name in the manuscript, and that when the British Museum bought it, they intentionally left that specific page behind in Russia to hide the proof of the forgery. A big cover-up.
So what this does is it creates a really stark division. On one side, you have these two manuscripts, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, which the author labels as forgeries. And on the other, you have thousands of later manuscripts, known as the majority text, which are pretty much all in agreement, and which the author sees as the pure, preserved line.
Okay, so if the manuscripts used for modern Bibles are based on forgeries, then where did the quote-unquote true text come from? Well, the author presents this detailed alternative history of perfect preservation.
According to this source, there's a perfect, unbroken chain. It supposedly starts in the 1st century with government scribes writing down Jesus' words verbatim.
This text was then adopted and perfectly preserved by the Eastern Roman Empire for more than 1,000 years. After Constantinople fell, these pristine manuscripts were brought west, compiled by the scholar Erasmus, and finally translated into the King James Version.
And for the author, this is the absolute key. The age of an individual manuscript doesn't matter as much as its pedigree. The fact that it was sponsored by the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years, that's presented as the ultimate proof of the text's purity and accuracy.
So all of this brings us to the present day, where the author sees a battle being waged between these two competing histories, each one leading to a very different version of the Bible.
And here's how the author lays it all out for us. Two distinct paths. You've got the corrupted path, which starts with the alleged forgeries, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Those were used in the 19th century to create a new Greek text, which is now the basis for most modern English translations. Then you've got the preserved path, which follows the Byzantine manuscripts to Erasmus's Textus Receptus, which became the basis for the King James Bible.
And this is the author's ultimate takeaway, the big finale. In their view, modern Bibles have been fundamentally compromised because they rely on fraudulent manuscripts, and that leaves the King James Version as the sole reliable option in English, because it's the only one that descends from the pure, state-preserved text.
This quote really captures the passion and the core belief behind this entire argument. It's this conviction that deceptive forgeries, the tares, have been deliberately sown among the true words of Scripture, the wheat.
So, to recap, what we've just walked through is a perspective that just fundamentally challenges the entire foundation of modern biblical scholarship. It's a really dramatic counter-narrative, complete with state spies, imperial scribes, a 19th century forger, and a massive alleged cover-up. And this leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? One that goes way beyond this specific debate. When you're faced with such starkly different accounts of the past, one of careful scholarship and another of perfect preservation and conspiracy, how do you decide what to believe? What evidence do you trust? It's a question that really forces you to ponder the very nature of historical truth itself.